Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Lil Dudes Insect Academy podcast. I am super stoked to be here in Washington, D.C. at the ESA conference this year with my friend Lohit. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Lohit. Go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience.
Hi, thanks for having me, Bradon. My name is Lohit. I'm a 26-year-old entomologist working out at Towson University right now, and I study praying mantises.
Nice. Yeah, so we'll get into that a little bit more. But let's just start with where did you go to school, and how did that, how has that process gone so far for you?
Yeah, so you want me to start with my undergrad? Then
just start from the beginning, yep.
So I went to UC Davis for my undergrad. I actually didn't come in as an entomology major, though I did have an interest in insects for a long time. I've actually been raising mantises in captivity ever since I was 6 years old, so definitely been interested in them, but didn't think about it as a career path until I was fortunate enough to run into the Entomology Club and their faculty advisor, who pointed me to the direction of the Bohart Museum of Entomology and all the awesome people there, and they sort of took me under their wing. And as someone who had no scientific background in research in insects, but just an interest in insects, they were super welcoming, and I just fell in love with it. So from there, I just continued to stick with mantises, wanting to do research on mantises, and now I'm doing a master's at Towson University.
Very awesome. Yeah. So let's get into a little bit of your work that you've done so far. So praying mantises, what originally got you interested in praying mantises specifically?
That's the big question, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure, as you know, there's a ton of entomologists doing a lot of awesome research with a lot of awesome insects, and I always love hearing about other people's research, and I always find it very interesting in a once removed sort of way. You know, I love hearing about it. But for mantises, something about them, and I still haven't figured out what.
Yeah.
It just really drew me to them. I think they are very charismatic, as many people would agree. The prey capture is super interesting to watch.
Yeah.
I was very fortunate in that my parents didn't mind me keeping a bunch of bugs in my room, and so I had a constant vested interest in watching all these cool animals develop in captivity and get to witness some of their behaviors and stuff that normally you might not be able to be privy to. And I think that definitely stoked my interest in a big way.
Yeah, that's super awesome, and that's kind of how you originally got interested in entomology. Also, that kind of they're kind of a combo, or was that later?
Yeah, I mean, I knew about entomologists as a concept in the past when I was younger, and I always thought it would be very cool to do something like what Steve Irwin did or Jeff Corwin did, being out in nature and being a part of nature and looking at these cool animals.
For sure.
But I never really understood what it could be as a career path until I found the research at Davis and the community there that was all super helpful and welcoming, and I really felt like I fit in, and it was kind of a lock and key situation where after being in the research space for about a year or so, I was like, wow, this is really something I want to do, and if I could do it on mantises, then that's fantastic. So
So let's start with your undergrad. What were some of the projects that you worked on in your college career so far, starting with your undergrad?
Yeah, sure. So in my undergrad, one of the first things I worked on in the Bohart Museum was working on this project called the LepNet database. So we were taking moths and butterflies that were cataloged and sort of adding their database online to be available for other entomologists to use. Not mantis focused, but the nice thing about that is, as the other sort of task that I gave myself, is I was able to sort the mantis collection at the museum. So that was fantastic. So we moved the collection from about 4 or 5 drawers into about 10 to 12 drawers separated by family and genus and species and such, as best as I could get at the time. And then after that, I worked in the Phil Ward lab with ants for a little bit.
Nice.
And I worked with Brendan Boudinot, and I learned a lot from him. And I took a lot of that knowledge with me when I moved to the Jason Bond lab after that, and we actually published a paper together on the Mantodia of Belize. So if you're ever in Belize and you need a handbook on what mantises are there, you can go find that publication. And
really?
There's a great interactive key that you could use.
Yeah. So how about next with your master's? How about that?
Yeah, so currently my master's thesis is looking at prey capture variation in praying mantises. So we've been filming a bunch of species in high speed, 1,000 frames per second because they are super fast.
Super fast,
super fast, and we've been seeing some really cool stuff. I don't want to spoil the data yet. I don't wait for it to publish, but we are seeing evidence that different species are hunting differently and very differently in some cases. So sort of breaking the stereotype that they're generalist predators as a whole, and we're seeing that's probably not really going to be the case. Different species, and specifically different mimicking mantises that are mimicking sticks versus flowers, are going to be hunting differently.
Interesting. Yeah. So, So if a mantis looks like a flower, it's going to attract pollinators, right? And so you're seeing that is a common food choice of the mimics based on what they will attract. Is that right?
So we haven't actually done a dietary analysis yet. That's the next step that we're hoping to do, and that's going to be some other student's thesis.
Yeah, I'm sure.
After I'm gone. But right now I'm sort of categorizing the variation in the actual strike itself. So looking at how fast, how wide the strike is, the position of the prey relative to the mantis that induces the striking or feeding response, how much the mantis lunges during the strike, stuff like that. Yeah.
Wow.
So there's a lot of variation there, even though it's the same mechanism, sort of interesting.
So you've been keeping mantises personally.
Correct.
How many do you have currently?
Currently, it's a lot less than it used to be.
Yeah.
Doing graduate school, I am somewhat limited on time, but I'd say probably at the peak, including all the babies that they have, because they have many, it's probably closer to in the 500-600 range.
Oh my gosh.
Now it's more like 50, 60, which still seems like a lot, but it's actually quite manageable.
Little enclosures. They're all pretty small.
Yeah, they're pretty small. So, but it's still a great way just for me to unwind, but also just keep that interest alive. And, there's always moments where I get to notice something that I didn't quite notice before, and it sort of alters the perception that I have of the animal. And like, oh, okay, I didn't know it did this. So maybe it's functioning slightly differently than I thought in the environment. And it's actually been super helpful for me, because when I go to other places like Arizona, or I travel abroad to collect insects, mantises specifically, seeing some of those cryptic behaviors or the way they're behaving in response to certain stimuli really helps me find them in more complex environments.
Wow. Yeah. So have you gone traveling a bunch to go and collect them in the wild at all, or are these videos you're recording? They're in a lab, right?
Correct. Yeah. So my thesis research currently, we're filming them in the lab setting. So we are missing some environmental component of the data, which it's tough because with mantises, they're already hard enough to find as is, even for me. And I like to think that I'm quite good at finding them, but they are good at what they do. They're great at camouflage, and so finding them, and then let alone seeing the actual prey capture event in the wild undisturbed is, extremely rare. It's very unlikely to happen. So these lab studies are probably the closest we're going to get, and by doing a lot of replicates, we can sort of get a good idea for what the actual nature of the strike.
Outliers.
Eliminate outliers, exactly. But I have gone traveling. I don't know if it's a lot by some people's standards, but I've been to Belize and more recently Guyana to collect mantises.
Cool.
And usually I go to Arizona almost every year, just with some friends, and I collect mantises there as well. And I'm actually describing a new species from Arizona, and it's not a small one. So
nice. Congratulations on that.
Thank
That's
you.
awesome.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you get these mantises, or do you have special, privileges working with the college to obtain some of them?
Yeah. So a large part of the insects I used to keep were just sourced from domestic hobbyists, so other people who are just interested in the hobby. They just have them, and I'm like, hey, do you have extras that you don't want, or do you want to trade for something I have? When you're growing up in your middle school, high school, you don't really have a lot of money to just toss around to get stuff. But of course, now working at a university, we have USDA permits and such to actually house the animals. And Towson has a fantastic vivarium, actually. So it's a climate-controlled room where we're able to house all these species and get some great projects out of it. So
that's really great. Yeah. So I think, have we covered your research pretty well? Or
I would say so. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So let's move on to who do you kind of look up to? Like, who's your inspiration, both in the world of science or just personally, whether you know them or not? Are they of them, or who's your inspiration really?
That's a big question.
Yeah.
I think it's hard to pick it feels like a hand-wavy answer, but it's hard to pick one person, because the thing that
Right.
I've sort of realized, and I've been in several different labs now, and I sort of take away different things from each experience. I think each professor that's one of the great things about science, is that when you have people in different disciplines or with their own background, they have a different perspective on the same problem.
Right.
And so seeing how different people approach that has been super, super informative for my career and the way I think about things as well. So short answer is, I would say every PI that I've had I look up to extremely a lot. I think probably one of the people that had the biggest impact on me in terms of my career is probably the graduate mentor that I had, Bradon. He's been walking around. But yeah, he's a great guy. I was still sort of on the fence about jumping to research, and he very much convinced me through just being extremely passionate and excited. And I think that's a great lesson for anyone. I mean, if you're excited and passionate enough about something, everyone's going to be interested in it. So, yeah.
That's really awesome. Yeah. So, we talked about your husbandry hobby, but are there any other hobbies or activities that you enjoy in your spare time?
Yeah. I do a lot of macro photography. So
nice.
I have a Instagram where I post some science communication stuff and macro photography, just to
Very
sort of show people, like, these are some close-up details of these insects you might be missing, or just little facts about them.
Yeah.
And that happens just to nicely go hand in hand with the other things that I do. So there is that benefit.
Yeah.
And I think other than that, I just generally enjoy nature. So hiking, just being out in nature is always great.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Yeah. So moving forward to, what are your plans for the future? What are you thinking? Some more research you want to go and do? Are you thinking about maybe a PhD? Any future trips you want to go on, things you want to do? What are your goals for the future, really?
There's a lot.
Yeah.
I definitely want to pursue a PhD. My hope is to one day be a PI myself.
Nice.
I think the thing that's been sort of tough for me is there aren't a lot of people working on mantises, and so finding a PI that is willing to work with me on mantises has been a little bit challenging, but there are PIs out there, and so I think not just with mantises, but there are other groups where there are few researchers working on them, and I would like to be a PI where hopefully we have some students that do work on mantises, but also provide a space where students that are working on groups that don't have a lot of work done on them can have that space and potentially start their own lab in doing so. Because I think I would not have gotten this far in my career had people not given me the opportunity to work on something that I liked, and been able to stick with it. So yeah, I think that's extremely important.
Yeah, for sure. Very cool. Yeah. So last thing before we wrap up, where can my viewers go to learn more about you and what you're working on? Maybe social media, or you mentioned your Instagram with macro. Where can we go to learn more about you, your research, maybe the lab that you've worked in? Where can the viewers go to learn more about you?
Yeah, so I'll start with the lab website and the lab that I'm in. It's the Towson University Mantis Lab. So if you just search that, it'll come right up, and you'll see my advisors, smiling face with a butterfly net, and all our lab members. So it should come up immediately. And then my Instagram, where I do a lot of my science outreach, is Mantises, so the study of mantises, bit on the nose.
Nice.
But I do post about other things, so if you enjoy other bugs as well, I also include other insects. I'm slightly biased, just slightly.
Very cool. Yeah. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Sure.
This was super fun, super interesting.
Yeah.
Praying mantis are so cool.
I love them. Yeah.
So
Thank you
awesome.
so much for having me, Bradon.
Thank you. Yeah, this was super fun.
Yeah.